of course, is more to the point. There's been a huge amount of criticism of the very idea of deploying active duty forces against Americans in the streets of America. Where do you stand on that?
So that active duty forces, and there's a large misunderstanding right now between the role of the National Guard when it's not under active duty orders, like what you're seeing in the case of now, versus if it's, used overseas in war. Active duty forces, short of basically a failure of state government or a threat of overthrow of the federal government, should not be utilized on U.S. streets. National Guard, on the other hand, should when they need to be, because the National Guard is actually acting in service to the police department and in service to the governor, with the exception of D.C., because D.C., after the Assumption Act, the president actually acts as the governor of the district and the district guard. So these, in every case you've seen, have actually been guardsmen under the governor of that area. Active duty forces, no threat to the federal government, should not be deployed.
Right, but as you know, the president was talking about it, and he even on that conference call with governors called them weak and wimpy and how they need to dominate the space and all of that. Clearly that's been, roundly criticized by everybody from defense secretaries to former joint chiefs, etc. But the Wall Street Journal poll released over the weekend found that 59% of Americans were more concerned about police violence that led to the death of George Floyd than protests that turned violent. 80% of those surveyed said that things are out of control in the country. Now, that, to me, is a really significant poll. 59% of the people of the United States believe that they are more concerned about the police violence that led to George Floyd's death. Are you all reading the street? Reading your voters, reading the people well enough when you take your decisions and make your statements and speeches?
For me, yes, because I understand where that poll comes from, because the issue of the police violence is something that's been long-term, and until we do something, it's going to continue. The street violence and the protests we saw was short-term. That was a couple days of basically 10 days, I think, so far of protesting. So that's a short-term concern. Whereas the longer-term concern is this. That's why we need to address the issue in policing, but without saying things like defund the police, because I've heard many, even black leaders, say that that is going to frighten people and not what they believe in, but they want serious reforms. I think we all do.
I know that police budgets and this and that are dealt with by governors, but they are humongous. We just heard something like $100 billion go to police departments around the country. I quoted in New York alone, the NYPD is $6 billion, which is bigger than 50 countries' GDP, bigger than the whole of the WHO budget. And we're in the middle of a pandemic, remember. That seems to have somewhat gone down the list of news priorities. But surely America's money can be spent better in order to get better results, better goals, and create, more peace in the country.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. It depends. See, a significant amount of police budgets go to things like pension. And pension systems are pretty serious in this country in terms of needing reform, especially if you look in Illinois. That's where a lot of that goes. It's not all like MRAPs and that comes, surplus from the military. We can have a debate about that, but that's not going to be built into the budget. A lot of it is training. A lot of it is, body armor, body cameras. We want all these things on police. And then, if somebody calls the police and it takes 30 minutes to get service, they're upset about that because you need more police officers. So I think it's a lot more than just saying we're just blowing money on police departments. When you take a place like New York City that has to have a counterterrorism unit as well as, 50,000 officers or something like that, there's a huge cost to it. So I'm always for looking at budgets and saying, where do we cut waste out? But at a time when we're talking about training people better, especially in community policing, I'm not sure if reducing budget's going to help very much. And it's certainly going to increase response time when there's a shooting or something that somebody needs a response to. Just keep in mind, we're just coming off a spate of school shootings. I have a good friend who's a police officer that stopped a school shooting in Dixon, Illinois, because he was right there at school. That costs money, too, to have people forward located.
Of course, and we talked about the predominance of guns in the country, and also what does happen when you actually need to call the police if there is an armed, an armed crime underway and you need help. This is a debate that's going to continue. Congressman Kinzinger, thank you very much indeed.